Well, that was frustrating. I'll give everybody a couple seconds to come back. They said that there was some copyright issues. I don't know what. Okay. I don't know what the copyright issue was. Um, Hopefully everybody starts popping back in. Okay. Good morning, Araya. How are you? Steph, let me know if you're back in so I can continue with the answer. It stinks that it cut out on me. It said that I was copywriting something, and I was not. So, Steph, as soon as you're back in, make sure that you say something so that I know to continue. It stinks because I was on a... There she is. Hey, Vinny, what's up? Okay, so, Steph, to answer your question once more. So if you're a woman and you're told, and your husband is unable to pay for the necessities like your house, your car, food, etc., then your husband's not really a husband, right? Because the role of a husband in this time is to provide for the family, right? His income is very substantial. His income is what allows you to live the life you live and maintain the American dream. So if your husband's not bringing in enough money, well, you're probably going to have to go to work, right? And you're not achieving the American dream because you're not a stay-at-home mom who cooks and cleans all day, right? So women who were told to go to work, those families were looked down upon because your husband felt emasculated because he did not make enough money to support the American dream for his family, okay? And God forbid the woman be the bread maker, because if she, brought home a significant portion of the family income, then the man would not be a husband, and really the wife would be the husband if you're thinking about it from an economical standpoint. So from a gender roles perspective, if a man's not bringing home if he's not doing his duty as a husband, he's not a husband, right? Therefore, your family's not a family because you need a husband, a wife, and kids, right? That is the American dream. So, to sum it up, it's very shameful if you have to send your wife to go work, okay? Now, this, of course, would change as we get through the 50s. Women would start to enter the workforce as secretaries, nurses. They would leave the industrial industry, industrial industry to go more towards clerical positions. This was seen as more womanly work. You didn't have to get dirty. You didn't have to use your hands as much. You were just sitting there looking pretty and typing and receiving people, right? So, in all, women were trying to make strides at this time, but society was so used to women being subservient and men being the real superstars of the family, right? The provider, the protector, the powerful person who has the final say over everything. Interestingly, women did control the checkbooks in most houses. My grandmom, she would sit at the kitchen table and she would, go through the taxes, the bills, she would file everything. And she did this until she passed. And then my grandfather, who had never done any of that before, who had never maintained the family checkbook or family purse or whatever you want to call it, he was struggling because he had to learn the system. He had to learn how to budget. He had to learn how to shop with the money he had. Okay. Okay. Steph, you ask a brilliant question. How does suburbia affect race? And why did conflict arise due to it? So, there's this thing called redlining, okay? And redlining is when a bank or local government starts drawing lines all over the map, okay? They're squaring off sections of the town or city. There's a scale. It goes from, I think it's blue to green to yellow to red. Red being the poor, crime-infested areas that are a high-risk investment. whereas the blue areas are made up of white people who are very affluent and wealthy, and it's a very good idea to invest there because you're going to get your money back. Now, of course, these areas were determined poor by race, okay? So an area that was predominantly made of African Americans was ultimately considered an at-risk area, a high-risk area, okay? So, and yes, a lot of people of color were poor, but that was a systemic issue, right? They really weren't given a helping hand after slavery. They were just kind of floating by in the 20s, right? They were developing their culture, coming to the North. But they were never really able to reach the level, most African Americans, that white people were. And so these cities start blocking off these parts of towns, not literally, but on a map, and saying to banks, hey, these are high-risk areas. So what the banks started to do is say to the people who lived in those areas or who were moving to those red areas, they started saying, we are not going to loan you any money for a house or a car. Okay, you're living in a bad neighborhood. There's too much of a chance that'll be a bad investment, and you're a person of color. Okay, so this racial component causes a lot of tension. And, a lot of people are talking today about, oh, why do people live in groups, like racial groups? Like a lot of white people tend to be in suburbs in one area. African Americans in cities tend to be together. Chinese in cities tend to be together. Polish people in the cities tend to be together. Well, a lot of that is due to redlining, okay? And what happens in the 40s and 50s is redlining reshapes the American domestic landscape in that people were openly discriminated against and systemically discriminated against, as per usual. And this really shapes where people are going to settle, who they're going to settle with, and the type of economy or economic stereotypes that are put on them. Okay? So redlining is huge. It's a very big deal. It's very interesting. Very racially complex. And the other racial component to this is people of color were never really able to achieve the American dream, because what is the American dream? White, heterosexual, middle-class, suburban family, right? Well, anybody who's not white is obviously not white. There was a large population of LGBTQ people in the Hispanic community. Okay, so there goes the heterosexual thing. Most people of color were pretty poor, okay? They were not in the middle class like the white people were, right? So there's that one. And, on top of all of this, you have a government that's looking down on you, okay? And it always has. Then, let's say the parents are still achieving the American dream with a family, a big house, and a lot of money. Was it still frowned upon? No. So the American dream was not frowned upon, okay? If you had a big house and you had a lot of money and you were, living your life in the suburbs with your family, your wife didn't have to work, she was a stay-at-home mom, stayed with the kids, you achieved the American dream. You're the ideal family. So it's not so much frowning upon them at all. It's the opposite. It's saying, you are the best of the best. You are what people want to be. Okay? You have achieved the American dream. And because of that, you are really the icon of the 50s, right? Ideals make the icon for the decade. In the 20s, you have the flappers. Not everybody was a flapper who was rich and lived the Gatsby life. Okay? In the 50s, we're going to have the same thing. The ideal is a wealthy person who... the white family was a wealthy family that was really able to survive on their own without a lot of help. So it definitely wasn't frowned upon. It was more so, iconic. Okay, because the aesthetic of the American dream is the American family, right? The white American family. They are the quintessential American dream. Oh, I'm sorry. So, then you're saying, if they have the American dream and the mother's the one making the money, would that still be frowned upon? It depends. Although, I would argue, you would have more internal problems than external problems. So instead of people looking in at you and kind of saying like, "Oh, she's a working woman," it was really inside of the family that there was tension, right? If the woman's bringing home a majority of the money, the man's going to feel emasculated. He's going to say, "Well, I don't, I'm not playing the role of the husband." If you have money, then people really don't care that much. But internally in the family dynamics are totally thrown off. A good example of this is Queen Elizabeth II, right? The English queen right now. In the 40s and 50s, when she became queen and when she was coronated, her husband Philip, who's also still alive today, was very, very hostile towards her. He resented her, okay, because he would never become the king. He was just the duke, right? Because she was the queen, she had royal blood, he did not. So she was in charge, she had the power, she made the decisions, she had the money. So he felt very emasculated, he was very coarse with her, he cheated on her. So internally, tensions would rise between the man and the woman if you didn't adhere to gender roles, okay? Because again, if you are not adhering to gender roles, there is something wrong, okay? If you are not a man who's making money for your family and supporting your family, you are not a man or a husband. So I don't think on the outside people would really care that much if the woman was making the money. Perhaps in like the women's circles, like the women's friends or the man's friends, maybe that would be an issue, but overall I wouldn't say externally it was a big deal. Kaylin, did the Truman Doctrine work? So the Truman Doctrine was, we all know what the Truman Doctrine was, right? It was Truman's attempt to stop the spread of communism into Greece and Turkey. So he sends them money to rebuild and put down the communist revolts that were brewing. Overall, it did work because he did give them the money and he did help them battle down the communist elements. But so yes, Truman's plan worked. However, if we look at the effects of it today, what we have in those countries is Greece is economically shot. They're doing really badly right now. They have a lot of immigrants coming from the Middle East. They are pretty much underwater economically. Meanwhile, in Turkey, there's basically a dictatorship now. Okay, so in the long run, did it work? Maybe not. Probably not, because a lot of the issues, the internal issues, never got to be addressed because the Americans were so involved in another country's disputes that they weren't able to work out their own stuff. Does that make sense? So overall, I would say the Truman Doctrine was successful because it achieved its goal, but it certainly had negative consequences. Okay, and I'm not saying that the Truman Doctrine is responsible for Erdogan in Turkey, the president or the dictator, or the Greek financial issues. However, social issues were never really looked at as much as they could have been had Truman not interfered so much. Thank you, Nick Seidenbecker. I'm not sure who you are, but thank you for the like. Steph, how did Eisenhower's actions affect the Cold War? So, there's two ways to look at this. We'll talk about this more next week. However, MacArthur, Eisenhower being the militarist that he was, the military man who I take that back. He wasn't a militarist. I would say he was a military man, right? There's a difference between militarism, being a militarist, and a military person, a person who works in the military, right? Militarists believe all conflict is good, conflict resolves everything. A person in the military just fought in the military, right? But he's a war hero, he was in the military, he's very disciplined. So what he's going to do is, like I said, he's going to decrease the funding for the Navy and the Army because he says, well, they're kind of obsolete at this point. Okay, not completely obsolete, but mostly they're going to be obsolete. Because what age are we in right now? We're in the nuclear age, right? We're creating these weapons of mass destruction that are dropped by airplanes. So what we need to do is we need to invest in our Air Force so that our Air Force can use the nuclear weapons that we've created, right? Because, if other countries are also going to beef up their Air Force, we need one to combat that. We don't necessarily need an Army or a Navy anymore because our weapons are so powerful that really we're probably never going to see another case of boots on the ground war. So, sorry, something came up. So Eisenhower with the military was making smaller changes, but he was adapting to the political and militaristic landscape. What else? He was also responsible for being consistently ready to fight against Russia or the communists. Okay, the military was always poised and ready to go. They were always ready to jump into a conflict should one arise. In terms of foreign affairs, like we'll talk about next week, he's very interested in containment, just like Truman was. He's very interested in making sure that people realize that communism is not the way to go. Okay, this is his opinion. Communism does not work, so he says. Communism takes away freedom, so he says. So what he's going to do is he's going to get us involved in the Korean War. He's going to set the early stages for Vietnam. Okay, yes, I know we're thinking Vietnam doesn't happen way off until way later, but Eisenhower's where it really starts with Vietnam, with his early actions. I'm actually not sure on his stance. Maybe, Mr. Roebuck, you could answer this. What Eisenhower's stance on McCarthyism was. Certainly he was in support of rooting out communists and making sure that America stayed capitalist democracy, or republic rather. But did he necessarily agree with McCarthyism? A lot of people did not like McCarthy because it's a lot like what certain politicians in our country do today, where they make claims that they know all of these things, but they're not going to reveal any of that proof because of some convoluted reason. Okay, I've heard so many people talk about this, but I'm not going to tell you who those people are or anything else about them or what they said. So they could be totally fake. But believe me, take my word for it. Trust me. Sound familiar? So McCarthy did the same thing. I have a list of people in the government who are communists, who are spies. However, I'm not going to show that list to anybody, and we're going to still have trials, and we're still going to try to root them out. So, I mean, it's, again, another case of the American people blatantly accepting the words of a person who sure has some credibility, but when you think of it logically, there's something suspect about the fact that he won't give up a list, okay? He's not willing to share it with the army. He's not willing to share it with the president. He's not willing to share it with anybody. So I personally always say keep an eye out for people who make claims but are not willing to show their sources, okay? And then if they do show their sources, make sure they're legit and not just that person's opinion or what he's heard from a lot of people, okay? So in terms of supporting McCarthy, I'm not quite sure if he did or not, but he certainly supported rooting out communists. Okay. Eisenhower would also, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. He would deal with the Soviet Union in a much colder and indirect way than Truman had, whereas Truman was willing to speak with Stalin and the other Soviet leaders. Eisenhower really wasn't willing to do that. He wasn't really willing to be as open and meet as frequently and speak as frequently because there was this Cold War tension, right? Why should we talk to our enemy? They might bomb us one day. Okay, so Mr. Roebuck says, I think McCarthyism at first was supported by the Republican Eisenhower Party in the beginning. Once it became a witch hunt, I think his own party bailed on him. So, right, so once they realized, hey, McCarthy's kind of a shady guy who is really in it for the fame, in a lot of people's opinions, the party kind of withdrew. So, in terms of direct support for McCarthy, Eisenhower probably initially, but then it fell apart. McCarthy, yeah, he just, we'll get into him, don't worry. The textbook offers a lot of information on McCarthy too, specifically about the HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, and other dealings with anti-communist sentiments within the United States. Okay? Does anybody else have a question they would like to ask me? Doesn't have to be content related. It can be anything about the course, the test next week, the web quest today, anything you want to talk about, totally fine. We're almost reaching our time, so if you have any final questions, make sure you're typing them now so I can give you some time to do so, and I will answer them to the best of my abilities. But other than that, if nobody has any questions, we didn't quite get as many people as we got in the other blocks, but I think a lot of people from Block 3 came to Block 2's session, which is fine. But yeah. So I'll give you guys like another minute to type in. If not, if you're good, have a lovely day. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Please tell other people to come next week. We really want more engagement. A lot of people I know have other classes that the teachers are saying they must come to. But it would be nice if they could come to one of the sessions. So if you could reach out, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it. I like hearing from you guys. Okay, so it looks like nobody has any other questions. So you have a great day. Enjoy your night. Get your work done. Keep up with your stuff. We're officially in marking period 4. And have some fun. Don't stress. Okay? Like I always say, the last thing that's to stress you out is history class. Okay? So, complete the UN web quest, answer the daily question, and do any other work that you may have missed from previous days. All right? Have a wonderful day. I will speak to you all soon. Bye.